Okay, I think it looks like most of our crowd has arrived. The rest should be filing in momentarily. Welcome, everyone. We are going to have a discussion tonight with our honored guest, Delegate Dave LaRock. We will be discussing the parole board scandal, which is exploding, and we will also be discussing the situation with the Virginia Employment Commission. For those not aware of the latter situation, the Virginia Employment Commission was stiffing people on unemployment checks for periods of 2 months and more during the very height of the crisis last year. So a lot of people were really angry, and it affected about 500,000 people. The first topic of our discussion tonight, however, will be the parole board, which is a little bit of a feather in our cap. Our last mile outreach connected us to the individual who provided the information about this cop killer being released. And we assessed it. We found it was very credible, and we passed it up the chain, and our political folks picked up the ball and ran with it. And now the Democrats have a major, major scandal that they're going to be dealing with all campaign season long. Okay, if you have any questions or concerns, please use the chat. We'll also try and reserve some time at the end of this session for question and answer period. So raise your hand if you have any questions or concerns. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce Delegate Dave LaRock. Dave, can you get us started and tell us all about the parole board scandal for us?
Well, hello, David, and thanks for inviting me into your meeting here. And hello to the participants. We're glad that you're interested in these couple subjects that kind of depict what happens when you put a Democrat majority in the executive mansion and in control of the legislature. We're not just nitpicking here, in my opinion. We're looking at things that are going wrong and things that are going to have a really big effect on people over time. If I may, David, grateful for our RPB chairman, Rich Anderson, to be joining us. Rich is on the front lines in many of the battles that we're fighting, and I think we're going to continue to see good things coming out of his efforts. So, David, and I don't see everyone that's here, so if other friends or associates that I just don't see all the attendees. But again, thanks for being part of this. A little bit of background, and if I may, David, kind of in the style of a talk show host, I would like to read a clip from a Roanoke Times article, because they do a very good job at explaining what is actually going on for those who may not understand what it is we mean when we talk about the parole board scandal. But before so thank you. But the title of the article is Roanoke Times editorial, Why Are Democrats So Complacent About the Parole Board? And the title kind of reflects a little bit of a political slant. I think the writers of the editorial realize that any party or members of the party that are serious about being reelected want to be viewed as being responsible when it comes to managing things as serious as issuing or denying parole. And that is so far from the case. It just you couldn't write this stuff or make it up and have it be any more of a disaster, I think, unless you wait another day and then it seems to unfold and get even worse. And before I just read a couple segments of that, I want to just point out that this is very representative of the Democrats' agenda overall, as has been rolled out in the last two regular and special sessions, which is to just kind of flip things upside down as far as how criminals are treated, and while ignoring the effects of their decision and their legislative initiative, the bills they pass, what they will the effect that they will have on the safety of the good, honest, hardworking people in their communities. So again, shifting to this article, and I'll just kind of keep reading, not necessarily the whole article. I'll just skip over what I think it gives you the sense of what's going on. So let's recap the particulars. Again, quoting the article, last summer it became known that the Virginia Parole Board, an agency under Democrat control with Roanoke Mayor Sherman Lee as one of its members, granted early release of Vincent Martin, who was sentenced to life in prison for killing a Richmond police officer in 1979. You heard me right. Northam's own Inspector General found that in the process of the Parole Board violating both its own regulations and the law, this is what's known as, in politics, as not good. That's a little editorial understatement there, I guess. So more specifically, the Inspector General found that the board did not notify the Richmond Commonwealth attorney the way it was supposed to do. He further found that the parole board did not endeavor diligently, in quotation marks, the legal requirement to notify the victim's family. So I'll just stop and kind of insert a comment there, if I may. So think of this, you're perhaps a family that has been impacted, maybe even related to a police officer who's murdered, executed, not just shot in a shootout, not to say there's much difference, but they could actually then meet this person who committed the first-degree murder, was incarcerated for it. They could meet them out in public on the streets without ever having been notified of the early release. So I'll go back to the article. It says, moreover, he found that the parole board, this is speaking of the Inspector General, did not allow the victim's family, once it learned of the upcoming parole, to meet with the parole board in accordance with the board's own policies. Because the parole board's actions are mostly secret, we don't know Lee's role. However, the report singled out the board's chairman at the time, Adrian Bennett. Several Virginia Parole Board employees stated that the Virginia Code relating to the Virginia Parole Board policies and procedures regarding proper victim notification were not always followed under Bennett's tenure as chair. The employees stated that Bennett was vocal about wanting to contact victims, in particular in the case of Martin, and due to the expectation of opposition because of the victim was a police officer, one employee, that was the end of the sentence, because the victim was a police officer, one employee stated that Bennett instructed the Virginia Parole Board Victim Services Unit that if the victim of a crime was deceased, as in the case of Martin, no further victim notification research needed to be performed. So that alone is egregious enough, but since then, this is one of the initial findings, so since then, things have gotten worse. Last week, the state's main investigator filed a whistleblower lawsuit alleging that Northam's staff had threatened her job. So the governor who appoints the parole board had threatened the job of a whistleblower, and that the Office of the Attorney General had sanitized a report on Martin's case. Northam's chief of state says the investigator was biased. Maybe so, you don't know. So you go from this horrible decision to violating the laws as it related to disclosing this to the public and to family members, and then the cover-up seems to begin at the level of the governor and the attorney general, which is where the inspector general's report went. So this sounds like something out of like a Gangland Chicago cover-up movie, or just some plot in a case that could never happen in a state where law and order is valued and that the law is respected.
It sounds
that's where we are, David.
It sounds like a third world situation with this total lawlessness and the lack of even a pretense to honoring the law.
Well, I'm going to get to the worst part of this, but I couldn't agree with you more, David, except I hope we don't insult any third world countries by insinuating that their level of law and order is worse than ours. I don't know that it could be. Let me just put
competing heavily.
Let me put the cherry on top of the cake here. So you've got these people who are, malfeasance, it appears. I mean, this hasn't been fully investigated, and hopefully it will be. But what do you do with parole board members that prove themselves to be dysfunctional and incapable or unwilling to enforce the law. Well, here in Virginia, when you have a Democrat-dominated legislature, you give them a promotion. So the parole board chair is now a judge in Virginia Beach. So, you know, if you want to ask your Democrat, if anybody here has a Democrat legislator, I think it's certainly fair game to ask them why they would possibly, after all of this goes on, why would they give that person a promotion to a judgeship where the responsibility is as great of a responsibility as there is. The judges make life or death decisions, and this person is just proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can't be trusted.
Hey, Dave, can you please explain to the audience the role that the House of Delegates has in selecting the judges and why that's important in this case?
Yeah, yes, I will, Dave. It's a little bit different than the way a piece of legislation is passed, but just very simply, the selections and the nominations are made by a small group of people who typically are a member of the courts committee, and with a much deference to the legislators who where the judgeship is will be assigned. So, for example, while I've been serving, there have been judgeships that have where there have been appointments needed in Loudoun County, and so I have had a say in who is seated in those positions. So typically they're done in a block. Different people will be nominated. They're nominated in the form of a resolution that's put before the General Assembly, and very often, you know, we sort of defer to the people in the area who know these people. There are interviews conducted, so these aren't done without an awareness of who the people are and what their track record is. But in this particular case, we departed from what is typically a unanimous vote for judges, and this was done exclusively by Democrats. No Republicans supported this. On a similar note, there was one of the people who were arrested with Senator Louise Lucas in Petersburg, who apparently didn't have a very good track record as a public defender. I think the details were pretty well publicized that particular public defender mishandled a capital murder. Excuse me, it was a capital murder charge, and that charge was dropped. And or maybe it was, excuse me, I think it was attempted capital murder of a police officer. Sorry for being a little sketchy on the details. Mishandled that. Same person that was arrested for putting graffiti on a statue near Petersburg, that person was also nominated, and in a very other contentious vote was made a judge at the insistence of Democrats. So a bit of a pattern there, and just it's kind of mind-boggling to think that a person who probably should be behind bars is actually seated on a bench, presiding over the court.
So this is going to be a real issue in the House of Delegates campaigns this year, because they're the ones making the decision.
Well, in particular, I think this overall push by the legislature, the Democrat-dominated legislature, to pass bills that inhibit the enforcement of laws, making it much harder to be police officers, which means it's harder to hire good police officers. I had a piece of legislation in that would have limited collective bargaining so that local governments can't protect policemen who have performed poorly, and I mean, seriously not performed their job as they should. They should be disciplined and if it's appropriate, removed. But the Democrats, because they're protectors of union interests, resisted that, even though we dedicated a huge amount of time to what they called criminal justice reform, kind of triggered by the the George Floyd incident.
So this is a pretty typical case of the Democrats creating the problem that they then campaign on trying to solve.
That sums it up nicely, I agree.
By protecting bad officers who should be removed, and that leads to public sentiment against the police force. then they play the two sides off against each other, and it's really not a fair game. It doesn't work out well for the police. It doesn't work out well for the citizens. So yeah, it's the Democrats really have this double game that they play in every part of their policies, and we're seeing it brought into stark relief here as well. So
if I may add, David,
yeah,
it's not an absolute either or. Republicans aren't completely opposed to tweaking the law where it's necessary, but many efforts, one right after another, to perhaps make the bills that the Democrats brought forward to temper them with a little bit of common sense. In one case, one of the delegates, the Democrats' reaction was what you might expect. It was that any initiatives to diminish what they were attempting, we were labeled racists, which is just a really cheap shot. We're not there to be attacking any one particular group. We're there to make good laws, but they didn't see it that way.
Yeah, racism is their one shot explanation for everything, and it's really getting quite tiring. So, so the parole board scandal, as it unfolded, you were pretty early in on what was going on, right? Like you found out about this last May.
Yeah, I have been, less involved than our minority leader, Todd Gilbert and Rob Bell. They work in the criminal justice system as lawyers, and they have been very diligent in seeking out and I think perhaps even working with those who are conducting legitimate investigations of it. So they're pretty good about briefing members of the legislature, but they're the people who really have done the work to make sure that this just didn't get swept under the rug. And probably others on the Senate side. I don't interact with them as much.
Well, I understand that Mark Openchain is doing yeoman's work in carrying this on the Senate side. So, Mark, if you're out there, thank you. You're doing great work. So this is really this really sits inside the larger context of the Democrats systematically undermining all aspects of public safety, doesn't it?
I think it'd be hard to come to another conclusion than that, David. I think you're right. So even the death penalty, abolishing, looking out for people who have been proven to have committed the most heinous crimes, and abolishing the death penalty, and but at the same time promoting a more liberal taxpayer funding of abortion. So it's just very, very upside down and backwards.
All they care about is their political objectives, and they don't have a balanced understanding of what it actually takes to govern. So this is one of many different crises of competence, as I've been referring to them with the Democrat Party. There's the system after system, and we can get into the unemployment shortly. But that's not those. The parole and unemployment aren't the only things they've messed up. We know that there is a latent scandal in the nursing homes that has yet to be fully explored, but really should be. We know they messed up the vaccine rollout. We know, of course, that they did a terrible job on the election. So they're not really good at much, are they? What do Democrats excel at when they govern? Anything?
Well, they have stimulated a couple places of the economy. I think that ammunition and firearms are selling at a record pace, and that's been kind of typical, I guess, is under several different Democrat administrations. We can laugh at it, but what a horrible statement that people have to reach to, secure their homes in that manner to feel good about feel any degree of safety. It's a horrible statement, isn't it? I mean, some people own firearms because they're not secure, and it just shouldn't be that way. But Yeah, they're good at giving away money, I think, and spending money frivolously. That's kind of the difference. I'd like to think some Republicans are a little too liberal with the spending. We're not perfect, but I think Democrats think that the solution to every problem is a little bit more government and a lot more spending, and that's getting out of control more and more.
Yeah, it seems it's all they know how to do. Do we want to pause a bit, see if anybody's got any questions about the parole board scandal? Anybody, if you got any questions, you know, raise your hand, pop a question in chat. And really, there's many more details about the parole board scandal as it unfolded. The stuff going on with the whistleblower in particular is, you know, it's shocking, especially after these people were like, oh, whistleblowers are sacrosanct, and, you know, the whistleblower. And, well, I mean, we have a pretty genuine whistleblower here, don't we?
Mr. Gordon,
Yeah, I guess I got to the. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
thank you. Is there a way to rescind the parole board's decision in this case? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have an answer for that, but it's a good question. And you know, the laws that they've broken, for the most part, have been related to the procedures that apply to notification and a few other things. Whether I haven't heard anyone say that it was not within their discretion to make the decisions that they've made. So whether it's the governor using his automatic pen to do tens of thousands to reinstate their right to vote, or the parole board putting people who've executed law enforcement officers on the street, it may be that our only option is to really put a governor, Republican governor, sensible, right-thinking governor, back in that position, so that he can, you know, appoint people who'll get it right. But as far as backtracking and undoing this, I couldn't tell you that, Jeffrey, but it's a good question.
Okay, we got another question. Who's someone asked how many people were early released. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know there was another case of early release, which is a horrible, where I believe a rapist was released and he went on to kill his victim. So that's another part of the parole board scandal that's kind of hanging out there. It's really ugly. Dave, do you know how many total were released? Do we have that information?
I've heard that there's as many as 100 or more, but I hesitate to quote facts, David, because I don't have that information at my disposal. But it's more than just a couple people. So we mentioned this person who is convicted of killing a police officer is definitely one of the more sensational ones. But if they would release that person, I think they would release just about anyone. And I can't define the scope of it. But perhaps we could do that in a future meeting. I could bring a little bit more data to answer that question.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to know exactly how they're choosing the people that are going to be released. I mean, I don't really trust the Democrats at all, and I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility that there may be some bribes involved. I mean, these people really don't know any boundaries, and obviously if they're going to release a cop killer, then there's no ethical bar to taking a few bucks on the side. All right, we got some more questions here. Ron wants to know what is the action? What are the actions that Republicans are taking here to deal with this scandal right now?
Well, we're calling for an investigation. This needs to be investigated, and not by the Inspector General's office. It should be investigated by either the House of Delegates, should convene a committee, or the Senate, or a combination of the two. And we're pressing the governor to move in that direction. But as yet, he has not agreed to do that. I think that that perhaps suggests that there's involvement in the governor's office and the attorney general's office that they don't want to see come to light. And when you release, when you terminate the primary inspector, the whistleblower, at some point one has to, I think, draw an obvious conclusion that there's things to hide if they want to shut it down. But it may take some time. When they're in power, it's a little bit hard. Democrats in the legislature and in the executive, as you all know, but public opinion is probably going to drive that. And fortunately, there seems to be some pretty aggressive people in the media that are digging to find that out. And so hopefully we'll see that come about before too long.
Dave, as a follow-on, with that as a foundation, and we're seeing that played out at numerous levels, if we're stymied at the governmental level, what are we going to do either at the grassroots or from another angle? What do we do in the interim until we presumably take control back in 2022?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking the question, Ron. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I think we're heading in the right direction, but the answer really is that we've got to put people in these positions that can be trusted. I don't have a more immediate plan than that, other than what we're mentioning here, and that is to keep this public aware and informed of what's going on, and apply pressure to investigate. But our hands are kind of tied in the legislature when both branches of the legislature are dominated. I don't mean to sound defeated, but we've been at this for 2 years now, and they don't have much of a conscience when it comes to even very serious matters. I mean, look at the scandal that took place when Ralph Northam's yearbook came out, and Attorney General embroiled in the scandal, and we had credible witnesses that wanted to have a hearing, women that wanted to be heard and have their claims vetted, that they had been abused by the lieutenant governor, and the Democrats just stonewalled that all the way. So you really have to have leadership on board to seek justice in these matters, and I don't think there's much of an appetite for that. Sorry to say, Ron.
So really the bottom line here is that we need to win back these offices. Otherwise, the Democrats are going to continue to abuse their power.
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the federal government might see issues or crimes that have been committed, but I don't want to create false expectation there. I'm just not close enough to the investigation to think that's a realistic suggestion.
And given the administration in power, it doesn't really seem that the federal action will be very reliable.
Mm-hmm. And the Attorney General is our top cop, and he appears to be stonewalling it.
Yeah, he appears to be in. Okay. There's one more question.
Hey, everybody. Hello, my name's Robert. First time.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, first time here. Yeah, my question is this. Is there some way we can help to vet some of these judges? I thought they were elected in Virginia. I guess I'm wrong, but what can we do to help? Thanks.
Yeah, Robert, the process should be working. There's a pretty rigorous interview process. I've been part of that at different times. And ultimately, though, the selection of judges is going to reflect the will of the legislature. Now, we elect Commonwealth attorneys in Virginia. That's an important office, but even that is being kind of railroaded by out-of-state money. You've probably heard that different Commonwealth attorneys' races were heavily influenced by what people say is Soros money. That happened pretty close to home here, in the district that I serve. Over close to $1 million was dumped into $850,000 was dumped into a local county Commonwealth attorney's race. So vetting the judges, it's being done. I mean, it was part of the discussion that this judge from Portsmouth had just performed so very poorly and had been arrested recently. And so the process is working. It brought the information forward. I'm pleased to say that. You know, what could we have done different? I'm open to suggestions, but every Republican resisted this appointment, and it wasn't enough. So I'm open to ideas, but it's a tough situation.
Okay, I just want to address a couple of questions in the chat about election integrity. We have extensive plans on how to deal with the Democrat shenanigans. Don't you worry on that. We will have an election integrity presentation shortly. It got derailed by all the events in Loudoun County, but we absolutely will have that interim summary report, and you are all going to learn a number of very shocking things about how the election system works. And there's much that Republicans can do to ensure our rights that haven't been done, but this year they'll be done, and that'll clamp down on a lot of what the Democrats are doing in terms of election shenanigans. We'll get to that soon. Please stay tuned for an announcement for the reschedule of our interim summary report presentation. All right. Let me just check the rest of the chat here.
Dave,
Yes.
this is Ron again. I'm involved in the Quo Warrento project. I'm not sure if Ned has spoken with you about that, but we've gathered a fair amount of information. We're following on to a project that was started in Ohio, but we're on the verge of creating a Quo Warrento filing based on the failure to certify the voting machines here in Virginia. And one of the other projects that we actually pulled the trigger on today is that we sent letters to all of the congressmen, senators, the attorney general, the DAG, about the vaccine passports. So we've got some things that we're working on as well. So at some point in time, we should probably try and coalesce, bring those things together so that we can amplify the impact.
For sure. Reach out to us. Send us an email with the information about your efforts, and we will coordinate it with the other things that we're doing. Certainly, there's a lot of overlap, and there's probably a lot of ways we can help each other here. Okay, so we were also going to talk about unemployment. Let's see here. Just make sure we got all the questions. There's one last question. Why is this not an all-out offensive from Republicans on social media? Well, some Republicans are very focused on it. If you're tuned into what is being put out there, I see quite a bit of it. Our governor candidates are talking about it. I see some of our attorney general and lieutenant governor candidates talking about it. Some of our delegates are also talking about it. The House caucus, the Virginia GOP House caucus, has been hammering on it. And again, Senator Mark Openshain has been pretty relentless. So it is out there. Could Republicans be better at social media? Yes. Republicans need to get more aggressive. They need to, be present, be messaging more, just higher volume, get the word out there, because the press ain't doing it for us. The Democrats have the press owned lock, stock, and barrel. It's up to us to communicate our own message. And we can do it. We just got to be relentless about it and just don't stop. Keep pushing it out there. Okay, Delegate, let's talk about the unemployment situation some. Now, I became aware of it after the shutdown. I started hearing in the underground, rumblings of complaints about the Employment Commission, and then, I started seeing a lot of them. And I put out a question, how many people out there are experiencing this? And I got these nightmare stories that just continued and continued. And then I realized it was a very big problem. So when I reached out to see who else was aware of it, there was literally no one paying attention except Delegate Dave LaRock, which is why he is the perfect person to discuss this issue with us. So, Dave, can you tell us your experience and perspective on what happened to the Virginia Unemployment Commission and its failures this past year?
Yeah, glad to comment on that, David. It's a bit of a downer, kind of like the parole board story, but hey, we got to recognize what the problems are if we're going to correct them. And in fairness to my colleagues, David, I know many other folks have been just as inundated with requests for service as we have, and I'm sure are handling them efficiently. You and I probably interact a little bit more than you do with some of them, but I appreciate your making me sound like a rock star, but perhaps a bit exaggerated and entirely deserved.
You're a rock star for us. You got your perspectives in order, and that's why we love you so much. You're taking care of business like a good representative should be taking care of business. So we're honored to have you join us for this and lend your perspective.
Well, thank you, David. Yeah, I mean, the obviously the problems with the Virginia Employment Commission radiated out of the surge that radiated from the governor's broad and sweeping executive orders. I was not a fan of those executive orders at all because the governor was never intended to have that broad a power for the length of time, over a year now. Far from it. Legislature should have been involved in the decision making, and I, for one, along with many others, would have insisted that the decisions to shut down the economy would have been done much more thoughtfully. That's why legislators make laws, not governors. You don't want one or two people having that sweeping authority. So the governor didn't cause COVID, but he was the chief executive in charge of dealing with it. And in this case, I think the old saying that failing to plan is planning to fail, you couldn't illustrate the truth in that better than with how the Virginia Employment Commission played out. The surge was enormous. I think at one point, I read from my screen here, about an eighth of Virginia's workforce was filing for unemployment. And so far, since the beginning of the pandemic, about $12 billion in unemployment claims have been processed. So certainly would be a challenge even for a well-managed system. But this was a 40-year-old computer software system that was already much overdue for an update. And so these are things that the governor knew ahead of time. I don't know if he cared enough. I really don't think that he did. He sounds fairly compassionate with his announcements. But, the simple reality is that he and his bureaucrat friends never missed a paycheck, never had to make a phone call to make sure their paycheck is coming. And, I think because of that, very often the decisions that are made, whether it's to keep a small business closed indefinitely without any real giving them any information to allow them to plan, or it's mismanaging this employment situation. It's hard to imagine that with the resources at the governor's disposal and the length of time that this has been drawn out for, that they're not doing a little bit better. There's still an enormous backlog of claims. I mean, the role of a delegate is to receive the claims either by email or phone call, and it's been a breakneck pace for many, many months now. We load them into a spreadsheet and communicate that to the Employment Commission. They promise to process those, but then the same people call back week after week. Some of the times they've called the Employment Commission 100 times, they'll say, and then they call us back in frustration. So we're basically dealing with the same people over and over again. And so it's a nearly dysfunctional system. Now, again, not blaming the governor for COVID and the emergencies altogether, but certainly the scope of the harms of these massive shutdowns, I think, was just couldn't have been presented itself more obviously, the lack of planning than in this case of this Employment Commission. And so, missing a check is one thing, but when your rent and your food and your way of life is dependent on that, utilities and so on, I'm blessed to be able to say that I could continue life and continue to pay bills, but that's not the case for everybody. And so we owe it to the people of the Commonwealth to be prepared when the government going to shut things down. And I hope that never happens again. But if it's necessary, even for a short period of time, we need to have a plan in place and systems in place so that life can go on and people aren't put in these horrible situations.
Yeah, now I
I've got
this was really
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I've got pages of notes here with details, David, but it is kind of a downer situation, so I don't want to just ramble on in case people have questions or you want to converse about it. Yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, we understand that something like 500,000 people were affected by this, and they were stiffed on their checks for periods of time, 2 months and sometimes even longer. Longest I heard was about 10, 11 weeks. And I'm sure there are people who just, gave up in frustration and had longer periods of time than that. It was really the timing of this coming right on the heels of the shutdown that made it all the worse. And once we finally blew this all open and it started becoming news, then the Virginia Employment Commission, for a period of 2 weeks, stopped returning all communications in the most unprofessional act that I've ever seen come out of a government department. They just went dark, and it was shocking to me. Did you get a lot of feedback during that period? Did you hear a lot of what was going on?
You mean feedback from the governor or the
From
administration?
constituents, when the Employment Commission went dark and wasn't returning emails or phone calls for weeks.
Oh yeah, people have to call someone. They call their delegate, their senator, anybody they can think of. And unfortunately, we're a pass through. We don't control that. We do our best to help organize the information and send it where it belongs. But yeah, it takes a lot. It takes an awful lot of time. Makes constituent services hard to maintain. Much more so than usual to maintain a efficient and responsive approach to meeting people's needs. But we do our best. Incidentally, there were $40 million, according to the data that's been released, and has found that there's been $48 million paid to inmates in jails in Virginia. So I'm not going to say that's part of the agenda of the Democrats, but it certainly reflects a significant degree of incompetence. Fascinating, disappointing.
So incompetence is really the Democrats' running theme, and it's causing a lot of damage to the people of the state.
Yep.
It would be nice if we didn't have so many topics to cover in terms of the Democrats' incompetence. And it would be nice if we had more time than we do to really delve into all the ugly details of it. The unemployment situation in particular, there's 500,000 people who are affected, and there's only 9 million people in Virginia. So I really think that this is a much bigger election issue, given how it was all policy driven. None of it needed to happen. There was never a scientific basis to back any sort of lockdown. And 500,000 people were affected. But, Democrats don't really care about poor people, so they're not in tune with that at all. The way I look at it, the Republicans have both a responsibility and an opportunity here to pick up the ball and represent that 500,000 people who got sold down the river by the Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody shared a figure with me today, and I don't recall what it was, but there's some people that are in pretty good shape. I think Jeff Bezos has increased his wealth in the past year by some astronomical number of billions of dollars. So more power to him, unless it's being done at the expense of people who are coming up short. But it was interesting in having different proofs that things were avoidable. We had Governor Noem out in South Dakota chose, I think, a very smart and sensible approach, consulted with lots of advisors, and made the decisions that were most respective of people's freedoms and rights, and that didn't have the effect that we saw here in Virginia. So, commend her for that. Big box stores stayed open. People were close together, and there weren't these, huge outbreaks related to the folks that shopped in fairly close proximity to each other. So those things, and many others, I think, proved that it wasn't necessary to tell people they couldn't go to restaurants, and that 6 feet's okay this week and 3 feet's okay next week. I don't envy anybody for having to manage a state through a difficult crisis like we had, but we expect it to be done thoughtfully and in a way that minimizes the intrusion and the effect. So that's kind of where my thinking goes. Perhaps our listeners have some other ideas, our participants.
That's pretty much the case. There's a wide range of metrics, performance metrics that we can look at, where Virginia was dead last or close to it. So it's a very measurable thing how poorly Democrats in Virginia performed during this crisis. They were not ready for this.
Yeah, vaccine distribution put us last in the list there too for a while. That was kind of a shameful performance measure there.
Well, somebody just wisely pointed out in chat that the DMV is also just as bad as the VEC. And again, we have the overarching theme of the Democrats badly managing the health crisis. Yeah, the Democrats badly manage the health crisis, and as a result, all the different systems that we normally depend on for regular day-to-day life, those are all falling apart because they didn't make any of the contingency plans and backup plans. They didn't have any forward-looking thinking whatsoever. So they were all caught flat-footed by something that we saw coming the entire time. And it was really irresponsible and, again, totally incompetent. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. I know that I saw at least one person we have in the conference who actually experienced the unemployment crisis. If you'd like to speak up and tell your tale, you are very welcome to do so. You can keep quiet if you're shy.
What are you talking about, me?
Who's that? Oh, Joe?
Yeah.
Yes. Joe,
I thought you might have been talking about me.
You want to tell us your story, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Like, I got. So, I was actually fired from a position right around in March. Now, the company that I worked for kind of used COVID as an excuse, but they didn't lay us off, right? They actually they actually fired me. So whenever you get fired from a position, and it was a no cause kind of thing, but even so, they have to assign, I guess, a deputy or something like that to review your case in order to start paying you money. And I sort of anticipated this. I actually got a letter from my former employer and everything, and I had everything prepared for them, but basically I really couldn't get any kind of response from the Employment Commission at all for what had to be more than like 3 months or so. I think I finally got my money like around I got fired like around in March, and I believe I got the entire thing like late July or August. And I had already gotten a job at that point, so I already got a new job and everything. But I tried contacting anybody I could, anybody. All the offices were closed. You couldn't get through to anybody at all. Trying to get a hold of the Employment Commission was absurd. Like it was nearly pointless. They were shut down. You couldn't get a hold of anyone. I started complaining to my Democrat congressperson or whatever, and they were kind of nice, but they were respectful. Like, hey, we'll check into it for you, and they couldn't get the answers, right? But like it went on for months and months and months. It was like March, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. It had to be at least 4.5 months or so before I saw any of the money, and then I got all of it. They finally actually looked at the letter that I had the entire time that I had sent to just about everybody, but they finally just assigned a deputy. The deputy looked at the letter and went, okay, and then and then dispersed the money. But it took like that long to happen. It took forever.
But they really put you through hell. Thanks for telling your story, because I think it's important that people hear how this impacts on real people at in detail. So thank you, Jeff.
It really I didn't know if I'd ever get the money. I really didn't.
Yeah, I can only imagine how stressful it was during that period of time. I'm glad it finally got resolved.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of our session. We started a few minutes late, so we can roll a few minutes past the hour. Dave, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to impart upon our audience?
Well, I'll just kind of echo what you said to Joe there. Our government in this case was an equal opportunity destroyer. You were not alone. Claims that needed to be adjudicated wasn't uncommon to hear people waiting 6 months for that, and interconnected sort of complexities too. So meaning schools are closed, and so people being called back to work when they necessity required them to be with their children. Just a failure to plan for these situations really has and is continuing to disrupt people's lives. So, I feel your pain, Joe, and I wish we could do more about it. We're trying to get the schools back open. That's, not our subject tonight, but even that is resisted by the Democrats, I think, out of their loyalty to the teachers' unions. And we'll turn that one around eventually. Again, this is, kind of a downer of a session, David. I know the overarching theme is that there's light at the end of the tunnel. When we get past our convention, we're going to have a good slate of candidates. Am I right, former delegate Mr. Anderson? And we're going to charge to that finish line. And I think turn Virginia around. It's a great state, the cradle of democracy. You use the old cliche that our founding fathers, I think, they would be spinning in their grave if they knew what was going on. But there's an awful lot of good, hardworking, honest, patriotic people here, and we're just not going to let that happen sitting down. I think we've got momentum in our favor. The Democrats have so overplayed their hand with some of the things that we're talking about now that it affects people's lives, and they're ready for I think to put some Republicans back in charge. So we at least have to have a backstop, one control, one House or Senate or both. Perhaps even put a Republican in the governor's mansion, and then you'll really see things moving in the right direction. We've got a lot to undo, and put our focus toward a more offensive posture than just kind of trying to slow things down as much as we can. And so, David, I always like to remind people that our nation was founded and our people looked to our Creator prayerfully, reverently, repentance, and called on Him to help us as we seek to have a government that is not tyrannical. And so I need to do that more myself, and I encourage others to as well. That's a secret weapon that we have, and the other party definitely does not seem to be respecters of the God that we look to as the creator, as our creator, and as the one that our founding fathers looked to as they made the decisions that formed this great nation. So can I get an amen to that from anybody?
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to find that when they think themselves God, that the time will come, and often, where they don't have the powers of God that they thought they had, and it just doesn't go well for them when those frequent situations occur. Like when they put themselves in the middle of a highway thinking they can stop traffic.
Amen.
All right. Well, we're getting to the end of our session. I hope everybody has been educated and felt that this was a good, valuable spend of their time. I guess we can have a few minutes for any last-minute questions. Or Chairman Anderson, would you like to address the audience?
Well, I'll just be very quick. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Earlier, we spoke about, obviously, the parole board scandal, and that's clearly what it is. It's a scandal and high crimes. There was a question, I think, that was asked about how many people have been released. I did a little research today simply because I'm going to be interviewed on a Richmond area radio station about this very issue tomorrow morning. And it's 70 people who are serving a life sentence that were released. Think about that for a second. Crimes that were so egregious, these individuals were serving life sentences, 70 of them, and they were released. So there clearly is more action to be taken. This is a scandal of the highest magnitude. The second thing, something that was mentioned, was about Delegate LaRock, who I was privileged to serve with in the House of Delegates. He's been a leader on all these issues. And David, you and the Virginia Project I've enjoyed the partnership that we share with you from the Republican Party of Virginia. But one of the goals I set for us was that we would run delegate candidates and Republican candidates in all 100 House of Delegates races, even in the bluest areas. The cutoff for individuals to register to run in the June 8th primary was at 5 p.m. this past Thursday. We now have 86 registered Republicans who will run in that primary. And what that means, there are 14 more good, patriotic additional districts, and they may run in a party run process as long as they are nominated no later than June the 8th. And so I'm working with a number of stakeholder organizations, one of which is the Virginia Project, and we're going to find those people in all of those districts because the residents of those districts, they merit a choice: good government or destructive government that Delegate LaRock has spoken about tonight. So thanks for having me, David. Thanks for putting this on. And Dave LaRock, thank you for sharing your experience with our fellow Republicans.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rich.
We're honored to have you with us very much. As you mentioned, the solution to the problems that we're discussing tonight is putting up candidates, competing for the seats, and winning them. That's the only option that we have within the system. So we are going to pursue it. We're going to rack up as many nominees as we can, hopefully get all 100. And the Democrats are going to have a contest moving forward like they've never seen before.
David,
Okay.
would it be okay if I give my web address so that if people have questions or we want to share
Absolutely.
resources? Sure. Yeah, it's very simple. It's Vote LaRock. My name is LaRock. VoteLaRock.us, and we have a function there where you can ask questions. We'll attend to them, get you answers right away, share whatever resources we have. I haven't kept up with the chat comments. I did see one person said they'd like to see notes, and be glad to provide information like that as well. So it's VoteLaRock.us. Thanks, and thanks again to you, David, and the Virginia Project for putting this together.
It's our honor and our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Okay, this looks like it's about the end of our session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you appreciate everything you've seen, and we are looking at your suggestions for additional presentations, and there'll certainly be a lot to cover this year. We have another 8 months to deal with it, so be sure that every major issue that needs to be addressed, we're going to address it sometime this year. Okay, signing off. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.